I can go on. When sorrow heals my soul and burdens make me strong, though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on.
My sister in my heart, my brother in my song, though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on.
And though the journey is long, the destination is near. Though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on. So brothers, take my hand, and sisters, sing my song. When hope awaits at every turn, I know we will go on.
Welcome to this online service of Neshoba Unitarian Universalist Church. I am the Reverend Beth Lefever, pleased and privileged to serve as the minister of this congregation, and I'm so very glad that you have joined with us this morning. And before we go any further, I'd like for all of us together to take a huge breath of relief. Take a deep breath with me now and release it. That feels so good. I am recording from home this week, and as I sit down to write this sermon, which must be submitted to our stellar production team this evening, Wednesday, I am hoping that the emotion, joy, and inspiration I felt while watching the presidential inauguration will not have been sullied by those in our country who, let's say, may not be feeling quite the same joy as I. Let us linger with the message of love, strength, healing, and unity that were so uplifting in today's inaugural ceremony. My opening words are by the youngest ever inaugural poet, 22-year-old Amanda Gorman, a woman of color, who said at the inauguration ceremony this: "There is always light if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it." In the spirit of light, let us come together in worship. And now, Elaine Orland will light our chalice.
May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal, not to harm, to help, not to hinder, to bless, not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. Please join me in reciting our covenant, which will be displayed on the screen. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God.
Good morning. I like to think of myself as brave. What about you? Are you brave? Most of the time I am, but sometimes I do get scared. I get a little nervous about things like COVID and violence and mean people, but most of the time I'm brave because I know that I've got friends who will back me up if I need them to. So I want to read you a story about a little girl who was brave until she wasn't, and what happened to her. This is Sheila Ray, the Brave, by Kevin Henkes. Sheila Ray wasn't afraid of anything. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She wasn't afraid of thunder and lightning. And she wasn't afraid of the big black dog at the end of the block. At dinner, Sheila Ray made believe that the cherries in her fruit cocktail were the eyes of dead bears, and she ate 5 of them. At school, Sheila Ray giggled when the principal walked by. And when her classmate Wendell stole her jump rope during recess, Sheila Ray tied him up until the bell rang. "I am very brave," Sheila Ray said, patting herself on the back. Sheila Ray stepped on every crack in the sidewalk without fear. When her sister Louise said there was a monster in the closet, Sheila Ray attacked it. And she rode her bicycle no-handed with her eyes closed. "Yay, yay, Sheila Ray," her friends yelled, clapping their hands. One day, Sheila Ray decided to walk home from school a new way. Louise was afraid to. "You're too brave for me," Louise said. "You're always such a scaredy cat," Sheila Ray called. "Am not," whispered Louise. Sheila Ray started off skipping. "I am brave," she sang. "I am fearless." She stepped on every crack. She walked backwards with her eyes closed. She growled at stray dogs and bared her teeth at stray cats. And she pretended that the trees were evil creatures. She climbed up them and broke their fingers off. Snap, snap, snap. Sheila Ray walked and walked. She turned corners. She crossed streets. It suddenly occurred to Sheila Ray that nothing looked familiar. Sheila Ray heard frightening noises. They sounded worse than thunder. She thought horrible thoughts. They were worse than anything she had ever imagined. "I am brave," Sheila Ray tried to convince herself. "I am fearless." The sounds became more frightening. The thoughts became more horrible. Sheila Ray sat down on a rock and cried. "Help," she sniffed. She thought of her mother and her father and Louise. "Mother, Father, Louise," she cried. "Here I am," a voice said. "Louise!" Sheila Ray hugged her sister. "We're lost," Sheila Ray said. "No, we're not," said Louise. "I know the way home. Follow me." Louise stepped on every crack. She walked backwards with her eyes closed. She growled at stray dogs and bared her teeth at stray cats. And she pretended that the trees were evil creatures. She jumped up and broke their fingers off. Snap, snap, snap. Sheila Ray walked quietly behind her. They walked and walked. They crossed streets. They turned corners. Soon their house could be seen between the trees. Sheila Ray grabbed Louise and rushed up the street. When they reached their own yard and the gate was closed behind them, Sheila Ray said, "Louise, you are brave. You are fearless." "We both are," said Louise. And they walked backwards into the house with their eyes closed. So, when you're feeling a little scared, you can always ask your friends to be brave for you. Take care.
Author Helen Keller wrote, "Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much." There may be no more profound statement in relation to our world, our community, our culture, and certainly our church. There may be no more profound words regarding our future and that of our world. Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. Our morning offering will now be shared. Giving methods are on your screen, and please know how much it matters and how very grateful we are. My reading this morning is by Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Seth Fisher, used with permission. He wrote, "I was talking with a group of Unitarian Universalist ministers this week, checking in about how we're doing after the attack on the Capitol on the 6th and a general state of things. I said that one of the things I'm most worried about is the reaction on the left, that I've even heard Unitarian Universalist ministers speak positively of Antifa, or Antifa, I'm never sure how to say that. And if you don't know much about Antifa, they are a far left network that are anti-racist and anti-fascist, as well as anti-free speech and anti-government. The Anti-Defamation League describes them as a group that, quote, proactively seeks physical confrontations with their perceived fascist adversaries, end quote. Their tactics include conventional activism as well as harassment, intimidation, and violence. I've heard so much hatred and tacit approval of violence that I'm worried that when this is all over, whatever this is, that we as Unitarian Universalists may have blood on our hands. When I told my colleagues this, the reaction I got surprised me. It wasn't a shared concern. It wasn't empathy from having the same worries. It was a rebuttal. Another minister defended Antifa. She said that there was no room in the middle. We have to take a side, and if it's with Antifa, then so be it. Two other ministers said that they appreciated her comments for the balance she brought to the conversation, apparently valuing equal time for political violence. Honestly, I'm still heartsick about the whole conversation. I never thought that taking a position against extremist political violence would put me in the minority in a UU group of ministers, but there it is. It is with a little discomfort that I bring you this reading, but I think it's important. The bulk of Reverend Fisher's sermon, from which the reading comes, regards Martin Luther King's teachings about nonviolent action, and I was very taken with it when he shared it on the minister's online chat list. While there was much in it that was persuasive and inspiring, I felt compelled to share the opening of his sermon because it so clearly illustrates the current difficulties we all are having in living up to Dr. King's challenge to nonviolent action and change. In a religious tradition that uplifts within its guiding principles the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. It is painfully difficult, even for that tradition's spiritual leaders, your ministers, to live up to those principles, to live up to the powerful and successful teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whom is a hero to so many of us. On this, the Sunday after Martin Luther King Day, and after the ending of a divisive and turbulent presidency, and the inauguration of a new and historic president and vice president who both bring a vision of hope and unity to the country, I wanted to uplift both the hope and the difficulties in which I think we are all enmeshed. This was going to be a pulpit pounder, this sermon, and I was concerned because, recording from home, I have no pulpit to pound. But then after watching the inauguration, I was less inclined to pound and more inclined to weep with relief and inspiration, hope and joy, even though I know, as we all do, that moving on will be difficult and challenging and likely far slower than we would wish. But let us lean into hope, buttressed by some of the words of Dr. King. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. Unarmed truth and unconditional love. Can we do any less than embrace that same belief? As hard as it has been for me to do so of late, it was far harder for Dr. King. It was and is far harder for our siblings of color and those of want and hurt and need and injustice. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. Can we, or even do we have the right to forsake the love of which Dr. King spoke? We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. Is there anyone among us who does not recognize on at least occasion the evil in the best of us and the good in the worst of us. If I may digress for a moment, there was a story in the news just a day or so ago about a bald eagle that had been hit by a car and was critically injured. It was taken to a Mississippi animal hospital under the auspices of the Mississippi Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where updates on the care of the eagle and its progress were posted to social media. Ultimately, the bird had to be put down. But before that happened, Wildlife Center representatives said the outpouring of concern and support and resources for the eagle's care were inspiring. For that brief time, one said, it didn't matter anything about who we were, where we lived, or who we voted for. It was all eagle. Think of that. Differences didn't matter. The eagle mattered. This great symbol of U.S. ideals mattered in spite of political and cultural differences and those attempting to help save it. Amazing and heartwarming. Martin Luther King had a dream that the children of former slaves and of former slave owners would be able to sit together at the table of brotherhood one day. Do we have the right to any lesser dream? And if so, for what conceivable reason would we wish to exercise that right? The divisions in our country are perhaps complex, but I remain convinced they are born of fear. People are afraid of pain, of hunger, of powerlessness to whatever extent and however they are able to experience their own power or that of their tribe. They are afraid of losing any power or control they might have. They're afraid of people and things they do not understand. They're afraid of their own vulnerability and zealously guard against acknowledging that vulnerability. Amanda Gorman said also in her inaugural poem, "We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another." And she said, "Merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy." Laying down our arms and reach out, merging mercy and might and right. In that way, maybe we can make room to see the fear that lives in the hearts of most of us and motivates far too many of us to distrust, suspicion, greed, aggression, and hostility. Yes, even us, even we liberal religionists who profess that love is the doctrine of our church. We can make room to see the fear and see the little child alive and well in every single adult, the child who is afraid and sometimes aggressively flails about in response to that inner and very real fear. Perhaps we can figuratively gather that child up in our arms and reassure them that we are indeed brave enough to see the light, brave enough to be the light, and brave enough to help them see and be the light as well. May it be so, and amen. And now let us move into a time of meditation, reflection, and prayer in spoken word and shared silence. Please breathe deeply and comfortably. loosening the tight places in your body, unclenching stress-cramped muscles, and quieting yourselves, trusting the arms of this community that encircle us all, and trusting the light that is the light that we are. In this relaxed state, please listen to the words of the prayer for peace or the prayer of St. Francis. Translate the religious language in whatever way best works for you. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. And until next week, blessed, blessed be.
And everyone beneath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone beneath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And everyone beneath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone beneath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. Everyone beneath the plowshares to trees swords, nations shall not pray no more. Everyone beneath the plowshares to trees swords, nations shall not pray no more. And everyone beneath the plowshares to trees shall live in peace and shall not pray no more. And everyone beneath the plowshares to trees shall live in peace and shall not pray no more. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more.
Hi, this is Bill Siler with another video recap of the most recent meeting of the Church Board of Directors. The board met via Zoom on January the 19th. In addition to all of the board members, we were joined by church staff, Sarah Osborne, Chelsea Orland, and Nix Hill. Also, Dennis King was with us. The secretary will prepare the official meeting minutes for approval at the next meeting. But in the meantime, here's an informal recap of what happened. Before the meeting, the board got written reports from the minister, the finance committee, the treasurer, and our director of religious exploration. We also got an oral report from Chelsea, our membership coordinator. Reverend Beth took a few minutes to elaborate on her written report. In particular, Reverend Beth took a moment to tell us what went into last week's quick decision to tighten security around our building in the immediate aftermath of the events of January 5. It was the decision that she and Chrysti and Walt Holmes made in light of some warnings that churches like ours might be targeted. The board had a lot on the agenda for this month's meeting, and under the skilled guidance of President Hogan, we plowed right through. We took up 7 items of business. As you know, the church keeps money set aside in a capital asset repair and replacement fund, the CAR fund. This money is set aside to pay the anticipated cost of maintaining our capital assets. One of those capital assets was the lawnmower that was stolen last year. Since we're not going to replace that mower, that is one less capital asset that our CAR fund needs to cover. As a result, in the coming budget year, FY22, we will probably not need to include our usual annual contribution to the CAR fund since there's one less asset for it to cover. The next item of business had to do with a second application for a payroll protection program loan. The board authorized the treasurer to make that application. While this is technically a loan, the key feature of the federal PPP is the readily granted forgiveness of the loan, so long as the money was in fact used to pay salaries. Our first PPP loan was for a little more than $14,000. Marcus thinks the second one might be granted for as much as $30,000. We'll keep you posted. Next, our secretary reported on the continuing task of certifying our membership numbers and other demographic data that the UUA requests from us each year. Kathy and Beth are pulling that information together for submission in February. Next, believe it or not, the Finance Committee is already in the early stages of drafting a proposed budget for FY22. There was no action taken by the board, but the Finance Committee did ask us to begin thinking about any big picture guidance we want to give the committee regarding their approach to next year's budget. The board was elated to learn that last year's stewardship campaign leaders have stepped up and agreed to serve again this year. Thank you, Jeannie Ortman, Dennis King, and John Stinchfield. The company that produced our last 2 church directories notified Kathy that they are going out of business. Their communication to Kathy was a little vague, but it seems they are offering to give us the directory data, the photos and the text, in some sort of digital format, maybe just a PDF file that we'll download, maybe something else. We're not quite sure. Kathy's going to contact them for clarification and report back next month. The final item of business was a sort of brainstorming discussion of ways we might improve our weekly online worship services. One thing was very clear. Each week, a great deal of time and skill go into creating the content of the worship service, separately recording each component of that content, editing it, and cobbling it together for upload. We identified a few easy things that we might do to polish up our services, and we learned that some simple seeming things are actually quite difficult. That was it for official action taking. The board will meet again on February the 16th. You are all welcome to join in and join us at that time. Take good care.